Welcome to today's China Future Tech webinar. I'm your host, Zhou Xing, and today's topic is Behind Nexperia Crisis and China-Netherlands Tech Tensions. We're very happy today to have our special guest, Marc from Dutch newspaper NRC, who has covered the Dutch semiconductor industry for more than a decade, and our colleague Finbar, SCMP Chief Europe Correspondent, who will analyze the issue from the European perspective. And then Coco Fong, our SCMP Senior Tech Reporter based in Guangzhou, who will provide insights from the China side. Let's start from the first question from Marc. So why the Dutch government is doing this? Everyone is asking this. Why they decide to cite a 1952 Cold War law that has never been used against the Chinese company in the year of 2025? Marc.
Well, excellent question. I think there was a sense of emergency at the Dutch Department of Economic Affairs that Nexperia was doing a 180, and especially the CEO of Nexperia, because he was being accused of mismanagement. What he was actually doing was using Nexperia to fund his other companies, and according to Dutch law, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. But he was also replacing his leadership with a lot of people who weren't actually allowed to run the company. And because there was a substantial threat that production might halt or be halted in Europe, in the Hamburg factory or the Manchester factory, that's when the Department of Economic Affairs decided to interfere with this obscure law from the 1950s.
Yeah,
and it's a move you could consider a bit too much or a bit too dramatic, because it was already the judge could decide, okay, this is not going the way we want the next period to go. But there was a sense of urgency that the minister Caramont responded to.
Mm-hmm. Marc, there are lots of guesses about what a possible role the United States has played in this, because what you described is sounds like more of a boardroom dispute, a business issue that should be solved, through due process rather than citing a 1952 law to seize the control of a company. So lots of questions from our readers as well, saying what's the role the United States is playing in this whole seizure?
Well, I totally agree that it's hard to deny that there's a role, at least in the background, for the US pressure when it comes to export controls, because that was the determining factor that Nexperia was in trouble. If you look back, Nexperia was bought by Wingtech Technologies in 2019. And back then, I spoke to Wing this summer, and he said back then there was no geopolitical threat whatsoever, because Nexperia makes these very mainstream chips. Well, even they're like the pepper and salt in any electronics device. Yeah. So there wasn't really a geopolitical interest, because the main thing the US was doing was restricting highly advanced chip manufacturing tools like ASMLs or highly advanced AI chips to China. So standard products like Nexperia makes was out of the picture. But things have changed. The relationship between the US and China have deteriorated, and the tension got way worse. So Wingtech, when it was put on the entity list back in December 24,
that's right.
Saw it opportunity to act as a global player disappear. And when this also was the case for all the joint ventures and daughter companies like Nexperia, Nexperia would be in a bad place. So Wing saw his opportunities to create a new, thriving company out of Nexperia diminish. And there were two options. So one of the options, which was part of the talks they had with the Department of Economic Affairs, was slightly making Nexperia appear less Chinese and more European. That was always the goal. But Wing, being the entrepreneur he is, didn't want to take a step back. So first he agreed to that process, and then suddenly this summer he did a 180, and he changed his leadership and tried to gain control over the entire company. And that's when the economic ministry jumped in. But you could say well, it was the circumstances of the geopolitical pressure that caused Wing to make this move, and to the Dutch minister to get this obscure law out of his out of his cabinet.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mark. Okay, back to you later. Now, Fingba, how do we see this from a context of China-EU broader relationship? I mean, how this is going to affect the overall kind of Europe-China economic ties, which are already in a testing moment? Yeah, Fingba.
Yeah, thanks, Joshin. I think you're right. They're already in a terrible place, and I think this is another spanner in the works of the spluttering engine. You know, we've I think in the last year or two, things have come to an all-time low. There's the geopolitical and the security threat that the Europeans see vis-a-vis the China-Russia relationship, and the trade issues have been mounting on. Last week, I was in The Hague, and I was speaking on a panel with the EU's top China official, and they said openly on the record, this is the lowest point that the relationship has ever been in, and this was before Nexperia. Sorry, the panel was 2 weeks ago. It was just the day of the expansion of China's rare earth export restriction regime. So I don't think this helps. I don't know exactly what the impact exactly will be, but I think when you combine this with the expansion of the rare earth export controls, the cumulative impact is that Europe is starting to really study and think about how it can disentangle some of its most deepest business ties with China, the dependencies. And look, this is not new. We've been hearing about wake-up calls in Europe since the pandemic. You know, there's an overcapacity in wake-up calls in Europe, and it doesn't seem as though they're making decisive action to get beyond that. Yesterday at the European Council, for example, you know, the member states watered down the only veiled language that there was about China's rare earth controls to remove any reference from China, but also to decouple the idea that economic security is linked to trade policy. So Europe is still on that the very foothills of that very steep learning curve. So I think this is not good. Whether Europe will take decisive action or not, I'm not sure. There seems to be a real lack of unity among European member states. Europe has got certain tools at its disposal. It has an anti-coercion instrument that it's terrified to use. They talk about this loaded gun being on the table that should never have to be used, which gives you an idea as to how they see this.
Anti-coercion measures.
Instrument. Yeah, so they didn't use it earlier this year against the United States when Donald Trump was trying to bully Europe into changing its digital policies in exchange for trade tariffs. And they seem reluctant to use it against China over the rare earth incident. The Nexperia issue, I think, muddies the waters on a lot of these things. We had a call on Tuesday between the EU trade chief, Maros Shevkovich, and the Chinese Commerce Minister, Wang Wentao, and the sense we got from that, we had a press conference with Shevkovich afterwards. The Europeans would like to de-escalate this if possible. If there's an elegant way to de-escalate this, then that would be the ideal solution. I don't know what that is, but that's what they want.
Okay, thank you very much, Fingba. Now we hear the China perspective from Coco. I mean, Coco, this happened right before China's National Day holiday, when the whole nation was preparing for a long break. And then when they returned from the holiday, this happened. And so, Coco, could you tell us a little bit more why Beijing was so angry? And it seems the whole country has been mobilized to denounce the action of the Dutch government.
I think what we hear within China is that both the Chinese company and the Chinese government have taken a very firm and strong stance against what the Dutch people did. The Chinese company repeatedly and publicly said that, okay, we're independent now and we comply with Chinese laws and regulations. And for the Chinese government, the tone has been very harsh too. China's commerce minister, when he spoke to the Dutch official, the Dutch minister for economic affairs, he simply said what you guys did was going against the spirit of contracts and market principles. In terms of why Beijing became so angry, I think for many Chinese companies, from time to time, some of them have been exposed to geopolitical tension, but it rarely happened in this way. if we look at TikTok, the US government is also very concerned about national security. But it spent multiple years passing laws and talking to the China side to reach a deal, right? And I also think that why they are so angry is because Beijing think the Netherlands is under the pressures from the United States to do so, although they denied it.
Very, very interesting. Okay, now we have this very interesting situation. So Nexperia has this office and the operations basically outside China. But China is almost, as Coco said, has open revolt with Nexperia head office in Dutch and has taken over the management of the Dongguan factory, which accounted for 70% of the output. So Marc, from your perspective, what kind of leverage Dutch have to solve this issue?
Well, of course, as you mentioned, the headquarters of Nexperia is in the Netherlands. So a lot of their administration and their finances are all concentrated there in the city of Nijmegen. And the factory you mentioned, Dongguan, it is in the Shenzhen area, and it is a fab that mostly does these standard products I was talking about. So it does other chips than the fabs in Malaysia and Philippines that Nexperia also has. I think one of the reasons that there was a lot of back and forth when it comes to this fab, that it's in China, so it makes sense that the employees kind of listen to the government and follow the lead there. So having control or regaining control, I think, is only an option when there's a diplomatic outcome and a solution in a way. I don't know what the Dutch have on the table. You could consider, if you just take this one step by one step, you could consider this obscure law as a step too far, too drastic. But in the other case, the Dutch judge did consider, and he was very clear about that the way that Wing was handling his company, the Nexperia company, wasn't the right way. And if you look back at his history, there's really this history of mismanagement and this style that gives you a lot of opportunities to discuss and ask questions about his motivations. So there was definitely a reason for the Dutch judge to interfere. And I think that there was a state of, you could compare it to this other event happening to ASML. It was 5 years ago. The Dutch government was kind of caught by surprise when all these export restrictions were forced upon them by the US mainly. And now they've become less naive. Finbar just mentioned the pandemic. Europe was badly hit by the chip shortage, and it realized, we have to make sure we have our own players. And there are not many players left. Nexperia is one of them. So they're very aware that they have to be to make sure that it doesn't, also gets outsourced against its will to China. And I guess that they've created that sense of emergency. I think having these diplomatic talks can explain that process, and there might be a solution in that. But of course, the backdrop is horrible, like Finbar said. The rare earth crisis, the ongoing talks about export restrictions. There's Nexperia is just one of the many problems the US and China have right now, and the Dutch are getting caught in the middle, and I don't think they saw that coming.
Okay, so Coco, from China's perspective, if China is taking control of the Dongguan factory, how long will take for, or how troublesome will it take for China to build some sources to replacing the Nexperia chips from Europe?
Nexperia, as Mark mentioned, it runs a typical global chip supply chain. It makes wafer in Europe and have them assembled and tested most in China, and they also run 2 other plants in Asia. I think from local reports, we can tell that the China factory in Dongguan has been running out of wafer supply from the European plants. From local reports, it said that the current level of inventory could last maybe until December. It's not impossible for the China unit to switch to local supplies. Back in 2000, China's wafer capacity accounted for only 2% globally, but it rose to like 17% in 2020.
Yeah.
And also we know that Nexperia's Chinese parent company, Wingtech, it has a sister company that runs a wafer, like 12-inch wafer fabrication facility in Shanghai. It has been put into use already, and it has been certified to supply companies like Bosch and Continental. So, but still, it takes at least a few months, based on our interviews with supply chain experts, for Nexperia China to replace the supply, because they have to go through all the validation and certification from their clients to prove that the new supply meets their quality standard.
Okay, very good. So if there's a divorce between Nexperia China with a general global operation, it seems it to be a lose-lose situation. So my question for you, Fingbai, is also from lots of questions from our readers is, why Europe is always finding itself so caught between the US-China tensions? Why Europe just can't go independent, have its own strategy?
Well, look, this is the soul searching that we have in Europe these days. It's everybody is saying why is Europe always caught in the middle? I mean, anytime one of these superpowers throws a punch, Europe gets caught in the chin. We are definitely sandwiched in the middle here, and this is the perfect example of this. The Nexperia case is almost like too on the nose in terms of illustrating Europe's awful position in 2025. But I mean, there's, as I said, the Dutch government was in such a horrible position here. If the Dutch government didn't intervene, the company would have been on the entity list and blocked from transacting with American companies. And in any case, if it hadn't intervened, the company was supposedly going to move its fab to China. So those were the choices. And if it does intervene, which it did, it faces getting cut off from the parent company and the supply chain and the value chain that it has in China. So I mean, these are like brutal choices that no government wants to have to make, and the Netherlands had to do this. The fact that they moved so quickly to do so, under duress or otherwise, shows that Europe can move quickly. So maybe that is one lesson to take out of this absolute saga. But look, I feel like we are in extraordinary times. Depending on where you're sat in the world, everybody is asking Europe to be different. The people in China are probably saying, be less dependent on the United States and grow some backbone. People in the United States are telling the Europeans they need to grow up and be less dependent on China. People in Europe want Europe to be more European. And I think this is the middle path that people have been talking about for a long time. We don't know if they can get there, but that's the challenge that Europe is facing in 2025. The discussions are ongoing. They're not yielding too much at the moment. But yeah, I mean, we have to find a way, I suppose, to do things in a more autonomous and independent way, so that when the next crisis emerges, Europe is going to be able to act in a way that suits its own citizens.
Very, very good. So, Mark, my follow-up question for you is: what's the general mood about this case, about this whole saga, Nexperia saga in the Netherlands? How's the general public view this, and what's the mainstream view of how to de-escalate it, or Netherlands should be stronger, and all these kind of discussions and debate?
Well, me and my colleagues have been following this case and covering this case for about 2 weeks now. And first, when we broke the news, there was this really sense of emergency. Okay, now we're less naive than we were during the pandemic. We're making sure that these vital ingredients like chips, the chips we use in our daily lives and every device we use, are we can able to buy them, and we are able to manufacture them. So you could say there was a sense of pride in the way the Dutch minister decided, okay, we have to freeze this company, otherwise this manager, his kind of mismanagement will lead us to lose potentially lose this factory. That's why they intervened. They wanted to freeze the company and not change it or, as you mentioned, take control over it. It was mainly like freezing the situation in time, preventing the manager from making alterations that weren't allowed. So following up on that, I guess the Dutch were kind of surprised or overwhelmed by the Chinese reaction. But you must also consider that the manager himself of WingTech Technologies kind of stirred up the emotions in China as well, because he needed to play that geopolitical card, to have China interfere and to have a better bargaining chip, when he's potentially cutting up the company. And I think following up on the wafer fab, the wafer fab that WingTech has in Shanghai, Wingsky Semi, it has another size of wafer, so it's 12-inch, and the European factories are older. They do 6 and 8-inch, but it's very hard to just replicate it. It's not just a carbon copy switching from wafers. So it might turn out that there's going to be a problem at Dongguan, not only because of lack of wafers, but also because the chips need other treatments as well. And it could also hurt not only the car industry, for example, in Europe, but also the car industry in China itself. And getting back to this automotive industry, I think there was a lot of pressure coming out of these sectors that kind of made the Dutch think, okay, we have kind of a crucial role. Nexperia, even though its products aren't very advanced, it's very hard to switch suppliers when you're in the automotive sector. So there are alternatives, but it will take longer. And I guess the Dutch audience is now seeing, okay, we were really blunt about this and we froze the company. Now what? And I think things will turn quiet now because the diplomatic process has to take place. But it's very hard to keep things quiet when we're in such an era of rare earth restrictions, talks between Xi and Trump next week. So Nexperia will be on the table as well. And I guess the Dutch don't like being in the picture so much.
Okay. So Marc, let my question be more specific. Would possibly the Nexperia dispute be spread to other issues? For example, if Dutch didn't get what it want from the Nexperia deal, maybe it will say, okay, now we have stopped repairing or fixing all the DOVs China has. And just a random example to see how is likely this situation is going to escalate into a more kind of broader damage to the bilateral relations.
Okay, I think that might be a step too far, and I guess it seems obvious from the outside. We as media, we tend to connect all the dots we have, and we see a line between them. But these are separate cases. This is a conflict about a company that has been mismanaged and should not be led in the way it was conducted by Mr. Wing. So timing was awful. I totally agree. And if you look at the ingredients, it really seems that the Dutch were just listening to the US. But as I understand it, also from the inside, there was really this sense of urgency that Nexperia would be taken to China, which would be completely against all of the deals and the talks that the Ministry of Economic Affairs had with Mr. Wing. So that was the reason for them to play this card. The question you mentioned, would it affect ASML, DUV, their servicing or spare parts? This is really a different ball game because, well, just look at revenue. I think ASML is like the supplier of these litho tools that are crucial to the entire manufacturing, the chip manufacturing industry, also in China. And this is one of the cards you want to play. Well, Finbar referred to the loaded gun you never wanted to use. These cards you can play only once. So I think there will be time needed to get to this diplomatic outcome. And the question you raised about ASML is entirely other discussion, I think.
Finbar, do you agree?
It does sorry, can I just finish?
Sure.
But it does prove the fact that the Dutch, even though they're tiny, they do have a pretty important cards in this global play, and this is one of the things that Europe kind of underestimates, and we might be punching below our weight when we don't use this these vital ingredients for the rest of the world in our talks.
So Finbar, next week we know that Chinese officials are likely to fly to Europe to talk about a long list of issues. I'm sure like Nexperia will be on the list. And do you expect any outcome from that? And what would be the best scenario for this dispute to get solved?
I wish I knew. I need better sources, obviously. But I mean, I struggle to understand what a diplomatic solution looks like in this scenario. I mean, maybe it's what Marc said, that each side has such pressing commercial and supply chain issues that it makes sense to draw a line under it. But the issue has become so politicized that it's difficult to imagine, at least at this stage, a quiet decision just to put it in a drawer and step away. But I hope that's wrong, because I mean we already have warnings from the German car industry that they're pausing certain production in Wolfsburg and parts of Germany, etc. So I hope that they can find a solution. Just to something Marc said there about this sort of these are separate cases. He's of course right, but I think a lot of the work that's going on in Brussels these days as they try to define their own approach to economic security is how do they move more asymmetrically. This is what they say the US and China doing. The US puts tariffs on goods, China puts export controls on rare earths, and Europe hasn't ever been able to do that. It's very difficult to do it when you've got 27 democratic member states, each of whom has a say in how you do things. But a lot of the work going on at the official level in Brussels is about how do you become less reactive. How are you more aware of your own choke points and how these levers can be pulled, and in which scenario each choke point would be weaponized? It sounds a little bit like pie in the sky at the moment, given the structures of Europe and the inability to move forward quickly with many things. But I do think they're looking at this, and I don't think necessarily that it would be applied to Nexperia, but more so the case of the rare earth elements. This is a clear case of a commodity being weaponized. What could Europe do in response? So I think this discussion about economic security and asymmetry and being able to survive in this brave new world where it seems like nobody else is playing by the rules except Europe. This is the discussions that we hear in Europe. Whether or not they ever get there, I don't know. At the moment, as SCMP Plus newsletter put out yesterday, Europe is rocking up at a gunfight with carrying like a butter knife. So they need to they need to do something.
Yeah. Okay, Coco, from the China perspective, what's the kind of ideal solution for this in a kind of best case scenario?
I agree with Finbar that I think the best solution would be, the two sides, they come into peace and things just go smoothly afterwards. But also we can tell that the China factory, it's on the one hand, it's running short of supply. On the other hand, because of the export control by Beijing, it is not able to export its components. What we can tell from local reports is that the China unit is, on one hand, trying to switch to local supply. On the other, it's also trying to expand its China market exposure. So the chairman of Wintech, Nexperia's Chinese parent company, he held a shareholder conference earlier this month, and he said that so far China's sales contribute about nearly half of its total sales globally, and he wished that the China sales would be boosted to around 80%.
Okay, so a local China plant supply chain for the local China
Local
market.
for China. Local for local.
Okay, this is a brave new world we are living in. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. A huge thank you to our guests, Marc from Dutch newspaper NRC and our SCMP Chief Europe correspondent Finbar, and our senior tech reporter from Guangzhou, Coco Fong. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.